Hello everyone, this is Gardner Goldsmith from the Liberty Conspiracy, and in this portable audio I want to follow up on a promise I made in a previous production. In that I discussed how we were going to have a larger exploration into the concept of rights and government, and even get into some aspects of religion. This is going to be the first of a series of productions that are put together so that you can listen to them virtually anytime. And they pertain to some of the most fundamental aspects of political philosophy and human nature themselves. The idea of the individual inherent right to be free. We're going to start things off today with a piece that I've just put together, which will be an ongoing piece, and which, when it is done, after we have turned it into audio broadcasts, will be published at the Liberty Conspiracy website as one of our blogs. It sort of introduces the topic and looks back on some of the issues that have transpired over the past few months that have brought us to this point to start studying our very conception of rights and the relationship that conception has with government. We begin this, and it's strictly going to be a monologue today, with this piece. It's called The Monster of Modern Mutation, Rights. We begin. There's been a series of disastrously erroneous statements recently made by politicians and political commentators concerning so-called rights and what the political class deems the necessary and equal provision of them by government. In that light, some advocates of small government have correctly observed that the very definition of the term right has been twisted, corrupted like a wayward child on the mean streets of Victorian London, turned into something that flips the relationship between man and government on its head. They are, of course, precisely right. And it is rewarding to expose some of those contemporary examples of philosophical revisionism in order to explore the term rights and how it has been corrupted and why. But it is even more rewarding to expose other contemporary stories related to rights in order to realize something more profound. By widening the lens, one can finally destroy the fallacy that, quote, small government is created to protect rights, end quote. It is not, and it cannot be. By studying current trends in the debate over so-called rights as defined, supposedly defended, or now offered by government, we'll come to see why this is the case. We'll understand that rights and written law in the hands of any government are incompatible. But first things first. At this time, the assault on the traditional definition of rights is almost complete. In Washington, D.C., Barack Obama recently announced the creation of a credit card holders' Bill of Rights, which will be yet another federal mandate running contrary to the U.S. Constitution and will impose new rules on how credit card companies run their businesses. The ethical and economic poison this creates can be explored at another time and are very valid points to discuss. But the title and politically correct Orwellian feel-good way in which the populace and pop media accept the terminology need to be cited. They send shudders down the spines of people who believe in natural rights and the definition of words, and justifiably so. This policy move was quickly followed by President Obama's proclamation that there will be a, quote, renters' Bill of Rights, end quote, in which federal politicians and bureaucrats will dictate to owners of rental properties how long they must wait before evicting a tenant for non-payment. Like the aforementioned credit card holders' Bill of Rights, this is a clearly unconstitutional move that could not stand up to a strict reading of the document and the few enumerated powers granted to the federal government. And it's an ethically backwards and economically destructive act of coercion. But it's got Bill of Rights in the title, which harkens back to the founding era and makes people feel good and shields them from the fact that these supposed bills of rights are nothing of the sort. In fact, they are infringements on the right to private contract and the retention and peaceful use of one's own private property, without which one cannot ensure the continuation of his own life. The deception goes unnoticed by all but a few. The warm, fuzzy propaganda is accepted. Rights have nothing to do with keeping government out of our lives and private interactions. They have to do with interfering and regulating our activities in order to curry populist sentiment in a society that no longer understands the concept of rights as it was first fully articulated in the 17th century. A so-called Bill of Rights means government, not the individuals with natural rights, can tell people how they will peacefully offer their services or property for use by another. 2 + 2 is 5. America loves Big Brother. But it goes further. As summer 2009 comes upon us, we hear a saber rattling on the deck of the not-so-good ship U.S. government. We hear talk of health care reform, and with it, the term health care is a fundamental human right is hollered from the masts. The pirates of the state prepare to invade private contract once more, slicing up what's left of the carcass of our semi-socialized health insurance and medical industries to be served to some Americans at the expense of others and to be regulated to make things fair. After all, we have to have equal access to the rights that government provides, don't we? Then there are the state stories, New Hampshire being the most recent and illustrative example. In early June, New Hampshire Governor John Partnering for Our Wellness Lynch signed into law, with great bravado, a bill legalizing so-called gay marriage. And here is what he said. Today, golly gee whiz, we're standing up for the liberties of same-sex couples by making it clear that they will receive the same rights, responsibilities, and respect under New Hampshire law. End quote. While that statement rolls well off the tongue, which is apparently all that is needed to make newscasters and voters smile, it has in it the same deep misuse of the term rights that can be found in Barack Obama's grandiose pandering. One does not receive rights from the government, as this leftist progressive believes. But it gets even worse. Now, even supposed defenders of small government are getting confused about rights. On a recent broadcast, Boston's most popular talk radio host, Jay Severin, a man who used to call himself a libertarian until it became clear that his principles were far from consistently libertarian, held an exchange with a caller in which they discussed the nature of rights. The nervous man on the phone tried to explain to Mr. Severin that rights are innate, granted by God, or, if one is not religious, simply part of the nature of one's experience. He said that governments are there to defend our rights, to protect us from encroachments on our rights, and that the rights would exist whether we had governments or not. Basically, he was simply restating what Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence. But Mr. Severin found fault with the caller. He said, to paraphrase, "Watch it, sir, because you're treading on thin ice. If you say that all men have certain natural rights and that they come from God or from the nature of their existence, then you run the risk of letting foreigners be granted the same rights we enjoy under the U.S. Constitution. If you don't clearly state that the rights we enjoy come from the Constitution, then you'll have to grant the recognition of rights to everybody, even if they're not U.S. citizens." To wit, duh? You see, what Mr. Severin was hoping to do was avoid the sticky situation of having to accept that foreigners captured on the grounds of other countries and brought to the U.S. in an unconstitutional military excursion, later held without legal representation or habeas corpus trials, and possibly mistreated in interrogations that use techniques termed torture after World War II, have innate rights as human beings whether they are citizens of the U.S. or not. That, regardless of whether these people are U.S. citizens, the rules constraining the U.S. government from infringing on human rights apply to anyone brought under the purview of U.S. law. Mr. Severin, who is usually a backer of freedom in many cases, was willing to flip the concept of rights upside down in order to reach his predetermined conclusion. He was willing to side with leftist progressives who tell us that rights come from government and are conferred by the very abstract artifice